You think you know what we're going to talk about.
But unfortunately, I fell down a damn rabbit hole and I've not gotten out yet.
Knife bros.
I literally Googled Sebastian Stan hands.
But just when you least expect it, we changed the game.
Well, yeah, because like usually in astrology, they would partner up air signs with fire signs,
All right, you can huggle.
time travel stories, and
At the end of the day, only one thing matters. We decide.
Well, we should make it a topic. Unfortunately, I didn't take German in school. I took Spanish and I don't remember any of it.
Three Fates Decide podcast.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Three Fates Decide. My name is Sam. I'm here with my two co-hosts, Mary and Liz. Say hello.
Hello.
hi.
And today we're going to be talking about fiction writing or our favorite published authors. Something that the three of us have kind of talked little bits and pieces over the past couple of, past episodes where we brought up certain series of books and things like that. So now we figured let's just go right into that topic. So I guess I'll start with what's everyone's favorite author or series?
Well, for me, I have several. My all-time favorite, 100% that I go back to 1,000 times over again is the Sherlock Holmes. I love Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has to be one of my absolute favorite authors. Yeah. Another one is Edgar Allan Poe. I know he was more of a poet, but he also did do the short stories, and I absolutely love his stuff. I think A Telltale Heart is probably my favorite.
That was my favorite too. I loved that story.
There's something about that and the cast of Amanditalo, I think is how it's pronounced. I'm not really sure. I've never been able to pronounce that correctly. Is another good one that I like by him. Of course, like some of the more recent stuff would be like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. Even though The Hobbit's like a prequel to The Lord of the Rings, but it's its own special kind of book to read. It really is.
Yeah.
So those are just some of my favorites.
There you go.
Yep.
For me, I'm actually very into Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I remember learning, obviously, like in high school, you read like Romeo, Juliet, and stuff like that. But like my senior year of English, it was all Shakespeare, and it really just made me appreciate. Like, I actually enjoy Old English, and I actually can understand it. So,
Oh, you
very
mean
into Shakespeare.
you mean like really old English or just Shakespeare?
Yeah, like so that like brings me. I like Jane Austen, so like Pride and Prejudice. Like I love that book, and it's so hard to read because it's all Old English, and it's
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean that's okay. For people who happen to be very obsessive linguists, you got to be careful when you say Old English, you know, because there's what we colloquially would call Old English, and then there's what is actually Old English. So,
okay.
Chaucer in his original writings, which I have read, mind you, and it is extremely difficult. That is what I would consider quote unquote old English. It's like good
yeah,
God.
I mean, I can't remember if they actually categorize that as Middle English or Old English.
I think it's Middle English actually. It's Middle English.
Yeah,
But
because
Chaucer, that is friggin' hard to read in
yeah,
Middle English. And I've
oh
read it.
yeah,
My
exactly.
God.
Oh yeah,
Never
exactly.
again.
Yeah, because like I remember I had this English teacher who's a big her specialty was medieval and Arthurian legends.
Mhm.
And she's I don't know if she's actually fluent in like Middle English, but obviously if your speciality is, that type of literature, you would have read at least a little bit of the original text, and that would be definitely obviously Middle English.
Mhm.
But so anything older than that would be Old English, which from my understanding is more similar to German and also a bit of Swedish slash Danish Norwegian. Because actually, okay, this is definitely on topic. So, there is this YouTuber. I would have to I could try to find the actual channel and put it in the show notes, but he actually has these videos where he does speak a little bit of actual Old English, and when you hear it, it's like you could actually hear a little bit of German in there, which kind of makes sense. So it's very fascinating listening to this guy speaking it and trying to actually figure out what he's actually saying, because he actually quizzed some other language enthusiasts to see if they could figure out what he's saying to them in Old English. It's amazing how much, even though it's Old English, there are still bits of the word you could sort of puzzle out if you really think about it, because in our modern English, the etymology has certain rules based off of what the original language it came from works. So you could kind of puzzle it out, which is fun if you're nerdy about that sort of thing.
I mean, I guess the only others I like, Danielle Steele. So like I'm kind of into like romance novels. And then obviously like I mentioned in previous episodes, Harry Potter, The Hunger Games. I like some Stephen King novels. I'm really into either like the science fiction or like the thriller, mystery type novels as well. So that's pretty much it for me.
Okay. So my absolute favorite novel that I regularly turn back to is Pride and Prejudice. It captured my imagination when I was in middle school. And of course, it does help a little bit that the leading lady and I share the same name. Um, and of course, it completely warped my own sense of romanticism, because now I'm like one of those millions of people, millions of women that like fantasize about my own Mr. Darcy, but who the hell knows if he actually exists anywhere. Um, I would say actually this may be surprising to some people, but actually another um favorite is not your typical novel. It's actually a manga series. For those of for those of you out there who also enjoy manga, one of my absolute favorite series is actually this one title called Fruits Basket. It's by a artist writer, which in Japanese would be called a mangaka. Her name is Natsuki Takaya. The last name is Takaya. So what I love about that series is that it starts out with a kind of silly premise. Like, you have a girl in high school. She ends up, through various situations, ends up living in the same house as one of her classmates who is a boy. And she accidentally discovers that certain members of his family are cursed, where if they get hugged by somebody of the opposite sex, they turn into one of the animals in the Chinese slash lunar zodiac. So you hug one person, he could turn into a cow. Another person, he turns into a dog. Another person, he turns into a snake, etc. That it's both kind of a funny series because of that premise, but also it gets surprisingly serious and dramatic. But anybody who's actually interested in that sort of thing, I'll let you check it out and figure that one out for yourselves. And actually, speaking of romance novels, actually one of my favorite writers is technically kind of a hot writer right now, because one of her books series that she's written has been adapted on Netflix, which I'm sure many of you may have heard of, Bridgerton. I am actually a very big fan of Julia Quinn. I've read not all of her novels, but I've read many of them. And if you enjoy Jane Austen, I would say you would probably enjoy her work as well, because it's set in roughly the same Regency time period. Well, I guess technically it would be considered Georgian, because I don't think it, or maybe it is Regency. I can't remember. But anyway, it's like roughly that time period. So if you enjoy romance novels and you also enjoy the whole Jane Austen, Regency period thing, then you would enjoy her as well. And I also enjoyed Hunger Games, Harry Potter, etc. as well. So yeah, that's it. Those are my favorites.
Um, trying to think
Yeah, I
where to
know.
go
That's
from
what I was
here.
thinking too. Okay, so if you had to pick one book, say besides your absolute favorite, which for Liz is Pride and Prejudice, myself is Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, and Sam, I'm not sure what you said your absolute favorite go-to was. I don't know if you did say, but if you had to pick one besides that, what book could you pick up and read over and over and over again, and why?
Hmm, it's a hard one.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know if I have an absolute favorite to begin with. So, but I mean, I guess like a book that I've read Harry Potter like multiple times, so really like that would probably be up there, as well as some of the um Danielle Steele novels, especially
Mhm.
there's a series. Oh my god, what is it called? I'll find the series name. Um, and that would be the other one for me.
Liz?
Actually, I do have one. It's been a while since I read it, but it's actually a Spanish novel. Obviously, I read the English translation because I'm not fluent in Spanish, but
Mhm.
it's very good. I highly recommend it to people, and I think it was a New York Times bestseller at one point. The English name of it is called The Time in Between. The author's name is Maria Dueñas. Um, Actually, for those of you who are fluent in Spanish and you want to try reading, the original, not the original Spanish. The Spanish name is el el tiempo de I think it's el tiempo uh de costuras. Let me quickly look it up. But the book is really good. Because it's actually a period uh book, but it's also a spy thriller, actually. The story starts in the 1930s Spain, and then it moves to Morocco, and then a bulk of the book takes place in Morocco, and it eventually transitions into World War II, which is where the whole spy aspect comes in. Um, because the main character ends up getting involved with espionage against the Nazis for British intelligence. And it's very good. It's very good series. I mean, in fact, in Spain they did adapt the book into a mini series, which I saw when it was on Netflix temporarily, and it was very good. I highly recommend it. Oh, okay. So I looked up the actual name. So the original Spanish title, again, for anybody who is fluent in Spanish and wants to read the original in Spanish, it's El Tiempo entre costuras. So, but yeah, so if you enjoy like 1930s, 1940s novel like setting, and you enjoy like a spy thriller, that is definitely a book I would highly recommend. I must have read it at least 5, 6 times. Originally, I got it as an ebook. Funny enough, I have an account on Kobo, and that's where I get most of my ebooks from. And initially, I got it when the book was like under $5 during a promo period. And I read the book at least 5, 6 times, and eventually I realized I enjoyed the story so much I bought a physical copy of the book, which I'm very careful of because, I have too many books and not enough space. So I'm very picky about what physical books I buy now. And all I can say is that if I enjoy a book that much, it's worth buying a physical copy.
For me, I would have to say a couple of the authors that I didn't mention that I'm huge fans of that I constantly love are Steve Barry, James Rawlings, and Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. They're two authors. They co-write books together. And I would have to say, if I was going to pick an absolute favorite, besides going back to my Sherlock Holmes, which is like, for me, Sherlock is like a comfort character at this point. He's like, when I'm stressed out, I read his stuff, and I go and I fall into the Sherlockian world, you could say, and I'm puzzling out the puzzles with him. But for me, I would have to say probably Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. They have a series. It's called the Pendergast series. He's a character that's in most of their novels that they're known for. I would have to say those would probably be my next go-to books of what I read over and over and over again, because they're like murder mystery world adventure type books, which I absolutely love.
Actually, I have a question for you guys. So, we've all, whether you want to call it dabbling or practicing writing, fiction writing especially,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any particular writers, whether they're your favorites or they're not necessarily your favorites, but you enjoy their work? Do you have any particular writers you would say taught you anything about writing or how to develop your own writing style or technical abilities?
Uh, I still don't know how to write. I write so much and I still don't even know what the hell I'm doing. I just write.
Same.
Yeah, no, I don't think I think if anything, I more look so that I write correctly, quote unquote. Like, that's not like just run on paragraphs and stuff like that. Like that's more what I look
Mm-hmm.
at. Because there are even just published books, as we've talked about before, like the 50 Shades of Grey series that are just terribly written. So, not that my stories will ever be published like that, but yeah, I just want to make sure that I write like a, like a legit person, like how it should be. But in terms of like style or whatever, no, I don't think I've looked at anyone and like, use them as like inspiration, quote unquote, at least for me.
I know for me, Anne Rice is another good one that I like, and I would love to be able to emulate her writing style, not necessarily emulate her and her world and her characters, because she has given birth to an amazingly vivid world of vampires that to me is like that's the holy grail of vampires. But like the way she writes and how she brings the characters to life, I've always wished I could emulate that and like bring that into my own style of writing, because I don't ever want to be the same as everybody else out there. Even though my writing, I'm like you, Sam, my writing, it's not good. I write for me. I mean, but I've actually gotten away from it. I need to get back into it for myself. But I would say if anybody, I would love to be able to emulate the vivid world that she has brought to life. Her and like Tolkien and all the huge writers that have written all these epics. Even George R. R. Martin. I mean, which we'll be talking about in another episode. Just his world and his writing and just the way he brought it to life. I wish I could do that with my writing, but I'm nowhere near to that level yet.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I guess for me, again, because she is, because Pride and Prejudice is my favorite novel, I would say it's not so much I'm trying to, again, like what you guys were saying, it's not so much I'm trying to copy a particular author or any such thing, because, that's just kind of silly and not very, embracing of your own voice, if you will. But what I would say for me, certain authors, what they do is they kind of teach me how maybe there are certain techniques I should take into consideration or certain philosophies I should take into consideration in my own writing. Like for Jane Austen, one of the biggest things she taught me is that you can write a book that may not have the most complicated plot, but it's both about what you know, and yet there's so many varieties and variations of ways to tell a story about something you know. And also, what I appreciate about her is that she makes it acceptable to be humorous and witty and um, almost sarcastic about things that you think are wrong or stupid or whatever. Actually, if anything, she definitely developed what I view as like the best humor, the best comedy is the sarcastic, witty, observational kind of humor, not like it's like modern comedy, so much of it is like slapstick and, fart jokes and sex jokes and stuff like that, which can be very funny, but at the same time it's like, it can get overkill if, most of your movie or whatever is that kind of humor.
Why I don't like comedies anymore.
Yeah. It's like that's why like I really enjoy Jane Austen's kind of work, like, you know, her writing, because she is actually like her writing does get very funny, and it's very sarcastic, and it's done in a way where it's not insulting necessarily, but it definitely pokes fun at things that she views is not right or not good or just straight up silly to her, and people just either accept it or they ignore the fact that it's silly. But she's like, no, that is somebody with a rubber chicken on their head. you know so that definitely informed my what I appreciate, what I view as like good comedy. And like you were saying before about George R. R. Martin, what I really enjoyed about his Song of Ice and Fire series is the fact that he does such a great job with playing around with narrative and perspective. Because, for those of you who don't know the novels, obviously I'm not going to spoil anything, but in the actual novels that, Game of Thrones is based off of, each chapter of the book is in the perspective of actual characters in the story. So, for those of you who are familiar with the show, in season one of the main characters that you follow is, Sean Bean's character, who is Ned Stark. And, you'll have like different chapters in the book that are in Ned's perspective. So you get his thoughts and his ideas about what's going on. And, you understand what his viewpoint is. But at the same time, you're also listening in on conversations he's involved in, and you can start to kind of piece together like you as the third person audience, you are listening on the conversation that he's in with the other character, and you as the outsider, you could start reading into what the other character is actually saying that maybe Ned doesn't realize himself. Because since you're the reader, you can switch between different characters when you read the other chapters, so you may know more information than he does. So it just adds to the tension
Mm-hmm.
happening in the story because of the fact you as the audience, you know more than what these characters know. And it's like you already could sense that such and such character is about to walk into a trap that they don't realize that they stepped into. Things like that. I mean, how amazing is it that, if you could be able to write like that? That's what I would love to learn more how to do.
Yeah. That's why I said I would love to be able to emulate their writing styles, not copy them, but bring the way they write into my own personal writings, like give my twist on it.
Right.
Like you said with George R. R. Martin, him doing chapters in different people's points of view and their perspectives, and so you're constantly getting an ever changing, evolving world that is his series of novels to, and it's like it pulls you in. That's what
Right.
I love. I love a novel that will pull you into the story, and you feel like you're right there with them.
Right. Exactly.
That's I love authors that can do that. That can literally make it so I feel like I'm right there with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just as a tiny preview to our listeners, we are actually eventually going to do a George R. R. Martin slash Song of Ice and Fire slash Game of Thrones episode, down the road. So we will definitely expand upon this a little further.
Yes,
Um,
you will.
yeah. I guess like one last bit related to Mr. Martin here that I'm going to bring up. He one of his bits of, like, I wouldn't say advice, but like one of his bits of personal writing philosophy that he's talked about is actually a quote he gave. Is actually a quote from William Faulkner, actually, where he talks about like he wanted to write, especially with with A Song of Ice and Fire, is that he wanted to write characters where the human heart is in conflict with itself, which I thought is a brilliant quote. It's a brilliant saying because when you think about it, it is, a really well developed character with a really intriguing plot for the character. If the because like in any story you have character and they get into a situation, aka the conflict, which
Mhm.
stimulates the journey and the plot that they have to go through. And with this quote, it's like the conflict is not necessarily an outside conflict, which is like the classic thing, like, like good versus evil, you have to fight a monster or a dragon or whatever. But the concept that the conflict is in your own heart, like you are at war with different sides of yourself, different choices you have to make, whether this may be politically advantageous for you, but it means that you have to allow, like, say, an innocent village to be destroyed by, the other army, if it means that you could later get an advantage over said, opposing
Mhm.
army in the big battle in a couple of days. Even though it's morally wrong to let these innocent people who are your subjects to be killed like this, for the purposes of ultimately defeating them, you have to allow it to happen. It's like the moral quandary. That is what I think is like amazing, in terms of like how to write a very complex character and a very complex plot, because it's also a
Mhm.
reflection of who we are as people. Like, I mean, granted, we don't have to make those kind of decisions, but we all end up in a situation where we have to make a decision that may be conflicting with what we may normally believe in, but there may actually be a reason we have to do this thing. So,
Right.
anything for you, Sam?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Is there any genre you have zero interest in reading?
Hmm.
Political.
Mm.
I just like anything to do with the political stuff. Although I'm kind of contradicting myself on this one here, just a tad. I did just recently buy a book. I haven't started it yet. It's called The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr. And as we know, Aaron Burr was a former vice president way back in time. Way back in time. His most notable claim to fame is he shot Andrew Jackson in a duel and killed
Alexander
him.
Hamilton.
Okay, Hamilton. Sorry.
I know that because I'm in love with Hamilton the musical.
Yeah. That was very
And
good.
I actually do remember because, one of New Jersey's claim to fame is that Alexander Hamilton and his son both died in Weehawken in the same place, like a year or so apart.
Mhm.
So that's like the one thing in history that I remember. But anyway, continue.
Right. So I actually haven't started it yet, but so that's like so that type of political, right? I mean, if it's about a political figure, like their life, I'm interested in it. But if it has
Right.
to do with like actual political, like there are political books out there that talk about politics and all
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
I have no interest in reading those. None.
Yeah.
Not that I don't have an interest in politics. I do. I mean, I care about what's going on in the country and the world. I mean, I may not be as up to date on it as I probably should be. I mean, I admit that. But yeah, anything like straight up political, I'm not interested in it. Like just take it somewhere else.
Yeah. Like I read like the Killing series, like Bill O'Reilly, so like killing Jesus, killing Kennedy,
Right. Right.
killing
My
Lincoln.
dad has read that series. Yeah, he's read several of them, not all of them, but he's read several of them.
I did actually like the books. I'm not a big fan of Bill O'Reilly, but I am a big fan of those books. But yeah,
Mhm.
no, I agree. Definitely more of like, the conspiracy, type things. Like there's so many people that come out with books after like major things happen, like when 9/11 happened and all that stuff. Like I hate those books that try and like prove how
Yeah.
a national tragedy or just any tragedy is fake or something like that. And then like obviously like the political
Mhm.
stuff. I'm definitely not into either.
Huh. That's kind of a tricky one. I guess I have a tendency to not generally read horror because I mean, I definitely don't like horror movies. I generally don't read those kind of books either. I might be willing to read things like Stephen King just because I heard they're very good, but just in general, I don't really read horror stuff.
Yeah, I like Stephen King. I think he's probably I think that's about the only quote unquote horror books that I really read.
Right. Same thing with Anne Rice. I read a little bit of Anne Rice,
Yeah.
but like just broadly speaking,
Mhm.
I don't really read horror. I don't really read that much sci-fi, like pure sci-fi. Um, I will read stuff where there's like some sci-fi elements, but just purely sci-fi. I haven't really dived deep into that
Mhm.
either. I think the only high fantasy that I've ever read has been like, The Hobbit, but I've never actually dived deep into, high fantasy. Um, like, things like, A Song of Ice and Fire, which is like what they call low fantasy, I think it is. That I've read more of in general, but a lot of the high fantasy stuff I haven't gotten into it much. I don't know. I seem to gear more towards like books where they mix genres a little bit more. So they're not like purely mystery novels or purely romance novels. They like cross a little bit just because I personally feel like it just varies up the stories a bit more. If you mix a little bit in that
Mhm.
versus just sticking with one thing. Um, that's all I can think about at the top of my head.
And I know like we've kind of said it as, or you guys have said it as we've gone along, but what I guess attracts you the most to like a story? Because like I know like there's been plenty of times like I've started reading a book and it's been boring as anything, and then like I just never finish it. But like what
Done that.
captures you to, like where you have like that book that you just can't put it down because it's just that good?
For me, I'm gonna have to start with a book that I read. It's called Relic, or The Relic. I think it's either Relic or The Relic. It's been a while since I've read it, to be honest with you. No, it's called Relic by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. Um, it's the first novel that we meet Special Agent Pendergast in, and just the way they write, it's it just kind of, at first you're just kind of like, this is seems like every other book I've ever read. By, just like, it seems like every other mystery novel that I've ever read, or adventure, just like your run of the mill. But then you get to what happens, and then you meet Pendergast. And for me, it's usually one or two characters, especially if I'm reading a, a series of books with that feature the same characters. Like, I tend to like books like that feature a main character that's like throughout all the books, which is why I like things like Sherlock Holmes and those type of books, because it's the same character over and over and over again. So you really get to know the character, you really get to know who they are and what makes them tick. And it's just the fact that he's so unorthodox as an FBI agent that it just draws you in, and it makes you go, I want to know more about this guy. What makes this guy tick? What makes him act the way he acts? What happened to him in his personal life, in his background, that makes him the way he is today, and how he's able to do the things he does today and solve the crimes and mysteries that he does today. That's what really draws me in. It's usually one character.
Yeah, for me it's a lot of it tends to be like the emotion, I guess, like, and like if it has me um wanting to know, like you said, like why certain things are happening. um so like an example, and I lied before. The series that I like is not Danielle Steele, it's actually Joanna Lindsay, the romance novels that I like. It's the Mallory family. And like as I'm reading it, like you said, you get to learn these characters because it's a huge series. And you get
Mm-hmm.
to learn these characters, and you get to kind of see why they are the way that they are and why they act the way that they act. Plus it is, you know, set in England like right after the Revolutionary War, and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And you get to learn about the season in England, the coming out parties, and how it was with if a lady was alone with a man, like how bad that could get and all that stuff. But it's like the emotion of it, like how these characters react, and I want to know, well, why are they reacting a certain way, and like that kind of
Mm-hmm.
starts feeding me into wanting to know more. And obviously not just with the romance novels, but really all of them. Like if you can get me emotionally, then I'm pretty much like sold. And especially like when you
Yeah.
make me cry. Like if you can make me cry, like I'm just gonna say for like Harry Potter in the last book when Hedwig died, like an owl,
Yeah.
and I was
I know.
sobbing. I had to close the book because I was sobbing
Yeah.
so hard.
I know. It's well, um, uh, any of the deaths in those series, it's just like some of them were just like, why? Other than to torture poor Harry, are you doing this? It's like, there was no reason for this to happen.
Yep.
Yeah. For me, it's pretty similar to what you were saying, Sam. It's like ultimately what keeps me interested in any kind of novel I'm reading is one of the biggest things is actually the main character or the main characters of the story, as the case may be. I actually have to care about these characters. Like, do I even like you or not? Because if I think you are an irritating twerp, that I hope that, the dragon is going to eat you in the next couple of chapters, then yeah, then I'm done. I'm just done with the book. I mean, I have read, well, not too many because I'm, I'm pretty careful about what kind of books I read, mainly because, just the blurbs that they have on like the back cover or whatever to describe what the book is about. Usually that is like the first level security, if you will, of like whether this is going to convince me to even read this or not. Because if that blurb premise is not interesting to me, then I am not going to read it. But then the next level is when I actually start reading it, within the first few chapters, do I basically give a shit about this character, to be extremely blunt about it. Because if you cannot make me care about, Jane Doe going, going to, have this adventure in this, fantasy world she accidentally stumbled into because she fell, into a magical lake or something. Then, I don't care. I won't care what happens to her when she gets into this magical land, because if you don't make her appealing to me within those first few chapters, then I don't care what happens to her. You know, I'm done. And I have unfortunately came across a couple of books where the premise sounded kind of interesting, but then by the time I was like a third into the book, I'm like, God, this person is so damn annoying. And yet she's the leading lady, if you will, of the story. And I'm just so sick and tired of her. She's just being a pain in the butt for no real reason. And she just doesn't get it that she's annoying. And, if I'm feeling this way about this character, then like I'm done. I'm just done. I can't read it anymore.
Yeah, I'm
Over.
with you.
That was me with 50 Shades of Grey. And
Yeah, like
Twilight.
if you don't care for the characters, there's no reason to read.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
the
Although
book.
I read all of the Twilight books just because I needed to see exactly how bad it was. And I mean it exceeded my expectations in being horrible.
Oh yeah,
But
absolutely.
50 Shades of Grey, I literally couldn't even get through the first book. I think I got about a fourth of the way through it, and I was just like, this is horrible. And I've never
Yeah.
gone back to I never read the rest. I can't do it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I
That's what
know.
I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, if you like, literally, it's like if this is the main character or the main characters of the story, if the author can't make me like them, then why do I have to care what happens to them? Like I said before, why do I have to care if, they have to fight a dragon? Because if they're annoying the heck out of me, then you know what? I want the dragon to win. I want the dragon to win and eat them and put them out of their misery and my misery.
Right? And
That
now
exactly, that's the thing. That is one of those linchpin things that can make or break a novel for me, is that I need to give a damn about these people. I need to care.
now I have read some novels that I will admit I've nearly put down, and I will say The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are two of them because they're very difficult to get into to start. So you kind of have to slog through a few chapters, like just keep going, and it gets so much better and it really pulls you in. But Because I mean, I love The Hobbit and I love The Lord of the Rings. Those are amazing books. But it's just like sometimes it's like, oh God, I have to slog through this to try to get into it, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, sorry. Sorry to interrupt.
no, it's okay. It's just trying to get through those first few chapters where you're like, okay, it's a little slow, and then it gets so much better after you really stick with it.
Right. Yeah. Funny enough for me, I kind of felt that way when I tried reading Victor Hugo, actually. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because
Yeah.
because like a lot of people who enjoys musical theater,
Mhm.
I enjoy Les Miserables,
Mhm.
but it's very hard to read the book. So there's like two different basic editions you can read. You could read the edited down version or the original, full novel version. So for most people, you would want to read the edited down version because basically I I could be wrong, but I think when Hugo wrote the novel, he was doing it in a similar way to how Dickens wrote his novels, where they were originally published in a magazine, in a literary magazine, where you basically get paid by the word.
Mhm.
So there are chapters where he dives deep into descriptions and almost like the history of France to a certain degree.
Mhm.
Which, if you are really interested in history, especially French history, then yeah, I would recommend the full original, version. Like whether you're reading an English translation or not, but you know what I mean, like the
Right.
full
Right.
version of the novel. So if you're interested in the history of France and and I guess the purpose is to provide context to the actual plot that's happening to Jean Valjean and Fantine and later Cosette and all the characters, but if you just want to know about this is what Jean Valjean went through, this is what happened to Eponine and Fantine and Marius and all that stuff, the edited down version is more than enough because
Mhm.
they'll give you a little bit of history to give you some context to some of what was going on, but they don't get fully into it. Like I do remember in the book, part of the reason why Marius ends up being friends with Eponine, because in the musical, when you get into the second half of the story, which is like when Cosette is older and then she falls in love with this guy named Marius, right? The reason why he's friends with Eponine is not explained in the musical, but if you read in the novel, you find out that part of the reason why he knows her is because supposedly Eponine's father, which is that shady innkeeper Thénardier, um, he supposedly assisted Marius's dad in like during the Napoleonic Wars. So after Marius's father dies, he technically has to owe this guy, a favor, like because of what the guy did for his dad. So he's kind of inherited the quote unquote, debt of honor, as it were. So
Mhm.
that's why he was interested in trying to find out where this guy is. And that's sort of how, he ends up meeting Eponine and they sort of become friends. But that is never covered in the musical. Like they just establish that they know each other, but they never explain it. So that kind of bit of history is actually interesting. And it is included in the edited version of the novel, but in the full version, they get into the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution, and that's what leads up to the political stuff that happens, in Les
Yeah.
Miserables. So, but yeah, that is hard to slog through as well. That can be very difficult to get through, but
Yeah.
yeah.
It's my favorite musical, by the way.
Oh yes, absolutely. I agree. I agree. It is
Uh,
very good.
it is a good musical, but I still think The Phantom of the Opera is my absolute favorite musical of all
That's
time.
another good one. That's a
Yeah.
very
Yeah, it
good
is a
one
very good
too.
one.
I've seen that a couple
Yeah.
Yeah.
times.
I actually read it as well. That
I've never actually read that one. Surprisingly enough, I've never actually read that one.
Yeah, if you really like Phantom, you might want to give it a try. I mean, it
Mhm.
it's really interesting to read because it is like definitely your classic gothic romantic novel in the sense in the more literary classic sense of gothic and romantic, not like
Right.
romance novels. For
Right.
those
Right.
for those listeners out there who aren't that familiar with like literary stuff and literary terminology, we're
Yeah,
talking about like
it's not, no offense, Sam, it's not Danielle Steele romance novels.
No, that's fine.
I'm not a, I just that's not, I mean, I've read romance novels and I don't mind romance novels, but they're not my thing my go-to to read.
right.
So,
It's
Yeah,
a
that's
guilty
cool.
pleasure.
and there's nothing wrong with
That's
it.
what it is for me. It's a guilty pleasure.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I mean, for
But
me, like, yeah, yeah,
no, go ahead.
yeah. I mean, like I said, like I forget which episode it was now, but a while back, but some episodes ago. But I did mention that, like, for me, romance novels are almost as fantastical in a sense, as like Lord of the Rings would be, because some of the situations that happens in these like romance novels, they don't happen in real life. It's a different kind of fantasy that you kind of transport yourself into when you read like soppy love stories with
Yeah.
like where like the ordinary girl gets to end up with a hot guy. Isn't that like a fantasy for most of us out there?
Yes, and you know what?
Yeah,
I hate as much as I love those books, I hate those books for that because now I have these high expectations of getting this gorgeous
exactly.
hot guy and it is never going to happen
I know.
because
I
no
know.
matter what anyone says, I could be great on the inside, but I got to have a little something on the outside to get someone looking like that.
Exactly.
Right, like I said before, like, with Pride and Prejudice, it's like the whole Mr. Darcy thing, It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah,
It's one reason why all three of us are still single. It's like we have these unrealistic expectations of what we want the guy to be, and even though we know they're unrealistic, we can't let go of them. Or maybe that's just me.
No, you're 100% right, and I blame books and movies because they give you
Yep.
those unrealistic expectations every time.
Yep.
yep. Hence why my comment.
I want a book or a movie that tells me the damn truth.
I mean, it's kind of like
Yeah.
literally what I was saying before. It's like, romance novels are almost a fantasy just
Mhm.
as much as Lord of the Rings is. You
Yeah,
know?
I mean,
exactly.
where is my Aragorn? That's what I want to know. Where is he? Damn it! Where is the man?
Oh god, too funny.
Or my
Well,
Legolas? I don't care. I'm not picky.
but funny little side story. So my boss, he and I have known each other now for almost 10 years.
Mhm.
He calls me a hobbit because I am very short. So I started calling him Gandalf, and he'd be like, "I'm not," because he has gray hair.
Uh-huh.
So I'm like, "Oh, you're Gandalf the Gray." I was like, "You're not even Gandalf the White. Like, you're not even that special. Like, you're Gandalf the Gray." And he was like, "Psh, I'm Aragorn." I was like, "You wish." You were free, like insults by Lord of the Rings. It's like fantastic.
I
That's
know,
how
right?
much of nerds that we really are, that we insult each other via Lord of the Rings characters.
Oh, that's how you know you're in deep.
Oh god, it's terrible. It's great,
Yeah.
but it's terrible at the same time.
Right. But yeah,
But
that's
I'm
what
looking
I
forward
keep
to
expecting it. I keep
the,
expecting one of them to show up. I don't care who. I
just
mean,
knock on your door.
yeah, I mean, at this point, for God's sakes, I'd even take one of the fucking hobbits. Pardon my French.
Hey, I had a huge crush on Elijah Wood when I first started watching, and then I was like, damn, no, mm-mm. He was cuter when he was a kid.
Well, I mean, I can't say I grew up watching him. I
No,
literally
me
grew up,
too.
like literally grew up because he's only like a year older than me. So it's like I grew up with him watching his movies. And I was just like, always had a huge crush on him, always thought he was a good actor.
Hmm.
And and all that. And then it's like I still had a slight crush on him, and then it was Aragorn, and I was just like, okay, I'm done.
And I became more of a Legolas. Orlando Bloom is beautiful. You
God,
can't
yes,
deny
he was
that. So,
absolutely beautiful. I'll tell you another one that did not get nearly enough was Howdear.
mm-hmm.
He was only in a few scenes in a couple of the movies, but that oh.
But I am looking forward. I'll be going on vacation in a couple weeks, so like I'm like planning what books I'm gonna read.
Mhm.
And my sister had given me a book. It's actually The Godfather.
Ooh.
So, which is a fantastic movie. If no one's ever seen it, you
Movie.
need to go see it. But I want to read the book because it is a little bit, according to my sister, it is a little bit different than the movies. So I'm excited about that. So it's definitely a book that I'll be reading.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm actually in the middle of the first Bridgerton book. We talked about it a little bit ago. That's
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of about a fourth of the way through The Duke and I I don't have a lot of time to read at night because I usually so tired I just fall asleep. When my head hits the pillow and I'm just like, I'm out, I'm done.
Right.
But when I do read, I've been reading that, and then my dad right now is actually reading The Secret Wife of Aaron Burr, which is the one I just bought like last week. I literally just bought it last week. So he's reading that one right now, and he says it's really good. So
I'll have to look into that one because I do like books about real life people.
yeah, I do too.
Especially
Sometimes.
like historical figures. It's like you learn things that you may not have learned anywhere else.
Right. So it's like
Oh,
it'll be interesting to actually see what it's about and actually read it. And then I'd actually like to go back and read some of the novels that I haven't read in a very long time, like Fahrenheit 451, Animal Farm.
oh, Animal Farm is very good.
It is. I've read it before.
Right.
I want to read it again. 1984. Some of the more classic um not so much satirical, but they're like classic parallels, I guess you could say, to the way some things seem to be going in our country, in the world now.
Which really tells you about how good of a writer George Orwell actually
Mhm.
is.
Exactly. Exactly.
Actually, just to circle back to like what you guys were just talking about like a couple minutes ago about like real life people, you
Mhm.
know, um, it's not actually a fiction book, but actually, you guys, if you're really open-minded about reading about like real life people, there's actually this really interesting book. I haven't read it in a while, but I highly recommend it actually. It's called E equals MC squared, the biography of the world's most famous equation. The author's name is David Bodanis. Um, it's actually a very interesting book. So what he does is he breaks up, the different elements of the whole E equals MC squared formula, and he basically explains the origin of like where those concepts came from, and you're actually getting kind of like a mini biography of each of the scientists and in some cases the mathematicians that discovered those concepts. And it's actually very interesting because when I was reading it, I learned about so many of these interesting people that most of them I had never heard of before. One of the more interesting ones was the one who figured out the square part of the formula. It was actually a woman by the name of Emily du Châtelet. That's her married name, du Châtelet. She was actually a mathematician in the early 1700s during like the time of Louis the 15th, I think it was. And she had such a brilliant mathematic mind that not many people initially took her seriously because, you know, she's a woman and she's from noble family and stuff like that. But at the same time, because she comes from a noble family, her family could afford to hire tutors willing to teach a girl very, like, what was at the time very advanced mathematics, because she was interested in it and she was very good at it. You know, so you learn all these interesting stories like that while reading this book and understanding this very interesting but very complex equation that, you know, Dr. Albert Einstein created. So yeah, I highly recommend it if you guys are interested in that sort of thing, to check that one out, even though it's not fiction per se. The other interesting side note I should mention is the only reason why I even knew this book existed was because I forget when this was, but it must have been at least 10 years ago now. On PBS, the Nova series, the Nova Sign series, they actually had, they actually showed a dramatic, you know, reenactment of those different stories from the book. So you had, you know, sections where they had actors playing Emily du Châtelet and Voltaire, who is like, for anyone who's familiar with French literature, is like a very famous dramatist in the 1700s. The two of them were actually lovers at one point, and they were both running a salon together where they were talking with other writers and scientists, you know, trading ideas and stuff like that, which is cool as well. Um, that was how I discovered that this book existed, and I actually read the thing, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And actually, the same author, wrote not a sequel, but a similar book where he just concentrated only on Emily du Châtelet, and that I never finished. I never finished that book all the way through, but I really should, because it's so good and so interesting.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
Read more books, people. Books can be an absolute. No, seriously, for people that say they hate reading, I'm telling you, find your favorite genre of film. This is my advice. Find whatever type of film you absolutely love. If you love like the romantic comedies, you would probably like things like Danielle Steele novels. Try one. Pick one up. If you like the more fantasy versions, like the more fantasy films, then I suggest things like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and you know,
Oh
just
yes,
pick
right.
a book up and just try it. I guarantee you, once you start reading and once you just develop that love of reading, you will never be bored a day in your life.
Oh yeah, and speaking of, you know, Dune is coming out.
Yeah,
Dune is like a huge series of books.
yeah, and but it's more like it's like a sci-fi fantasy. So if you like the sci-fi, if you like Star Wars and Star Trek and things like that, Dune might be a good book for you to for people.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Um,
Yeah,
there's
the
one
big
book
thing is
I
like you kind of have to find your taste.
Niche, yeah, your niche, your wherever you're most comfortable reading.
I already like kind of took up some time like recommending a couple of different books. Do you guys have any other recommends as well? Just so we kind of balance this out a little bit.
I mean, I honestly think like if you're not a huge fan of reading, but you have a favorite movie that is an adaptation from a book, I would definitely maybe even start with that because you know the story, but you'll actually see how much better the book is compared
Yes.
to the movie. So it'll help you kind of
Mhm.
learn how much better books are than, movies and TV shows and stuff like that because you really get the inner
Mhm.
workings of characters, thought process and why certain things happen and things that were taken out because they didn't feel that it was important enough to stay in and stuff like that. So that also might help if you're not interested in reading. Maybe find something that you're already a fan of that you know comes from a book and read the book.
Um, I guess for me, any recommendations I would have, if people like adventure, mystery novels, like I've mentioned them a couple of times, anything by Steve Barry they're so good. James Rawlings is another, his Sigma Force series is so good. But for me, Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, the very first book they wrote was Relic, but the very first book I ever read by them was one called The Cabinet of Curiosities. I would suggest picking that book up if you really like it's almost it's a murder mystery world, time traveling kind of adventure. It's really hard to describe the book. It's just really good though. And I really think starting with it, you'll get drawn into the world of the character, and then you'll be like, "Oh, now I have to go read the rest." And because that's what I did.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Catch us next time.
And see what we're going to talk about.
Because the three fates decide.